Oliver Twist Chapter 1. It was late at night in England during the Industrial Revolution. At this time, most English towns needed people to work in the factories that were beginning to open all over the country. Many people came to the towns to find work, but they were often so poor that they could not buy enough to eat and they had nowhere to sleep. So they went to the workhouses where at least they had a bed and some sort of food. In one such workhouse, an old nurse and a doctor were working in a small, dark room looking at a baby boy that had just been born. The baby found it difficult to breathe. They did not know if he would live.
What's the mother's name?
I don't know. She arrived at the workhouse last night. She was asleep when she came.
Can I see my new baby?
Poor woman. She was so beautiful. We'll never know who she was.
The baby was called Oliver Twist. He was sent to live with other orphans in an old house nearby. The orphans were all the children of parents who had been destitute.
A woman called Mrs. Mann was given a little money to look after the orphans, but she decided that she needed some of this money for herself. For this reason, the boys never had very much to eat. On his 9th birthday, Oliver was a small, weak child. He had spent all his life in the old building with Mrs. Mann, who was no kinder to Oliver than she was to the other orphans. Oliver did not go to school and he did not know the world outside. One day, an important man called Mr. Bumble visited Mrs. Mann. Mr. Bumble was an official from the workhouse, where the older children from poor families were big enough to work for their food.
Now Oliver's 9, you don't need to look after him. He is old enough to work for us in the workhouse.
Oliver was not sad to leave Mrs. Mann, but he was sad to leave his friends and the only home he had ever known. He felt wretched as the door to the house was closed behind him.
Why are you crying? You're very lucky to work here. We'll give you food and a bed for nothing.
The workhouse was a large, cold building. Oliver was introduced to the other boys who were all thin and weak as he was. They wore old clothes that were too big for them. Oliver worked hard at the workhouse with these boys and quickly realized that after a few months, they were all so close to starving that they made a plan. They decided they must have more food, and they chose Oliver to ask for it. That evening in the big, cold hall, the boys finished eating their usual thin soup.
Please, sir, I want some more.
What did you say?
Please, sir, I want some more.
If he is not happy with our generosity, he must leave.
For weeks, Oliver stayed in the cold, dark room. He cried himself to sleep each night, then woke up each morning and began to cry again. He had never felt so alone. He was only taken from the room when it was time to eat. Mr. Bumble did not want any of this. Happened every day until a man called Sourberry read the message on the workhouse gate. Mr. Sourberry, the coffin maker, decided that he needed an apprentice and told Mr. Bumble that he could take Oliver Twist. A new chapter in the boy's life was about to start. The next day, Mr. Bumble took Oliver from the workhouse and walked with him to.
Why are you crying? You should be happy to have the opportunity to work with someone like Mr. Sourberry.
I'll be a good boy. But I have no.
You have no what?
I have no friends.
He's very small, Mr. Bumble.
He is small, But he'll grow.
But it will cost money to feed him. Now get some sleep. You don't mind sleeping down in the shop, do you? There's nowhere else to sleep in our house.
Oliver was alone in a strange, dark room, surrounded by unfinished coffins. It was not much better than the room he had slept in at the workhouse. It was not easy for him to sleep. The next morning, Oliver woke up to the sound of someone kicking the shop door. Oliver opened it and saw a tall boy with a red nose eating some bread.
Hello. I'm Noah Claypole. You're from the workhouse, aren't you? I help Mr. Sourberry. You do what I say, workhouse boy. Now open the shutters. To know who is the master here.
Sit by the fire to have some breakfast, Noah. Here's some bread, eat it down below.
Why can't I have a good breakfast like Noah?
For the next few months, Oliver worked with Mr. Sourberry. He did not like the work, but Mr. Sourberry seemed pleased with him. This, however, did not please Noah Claypole, who was told to work inside when Oliver went out with Mr. Sourberry.
What happened to your mother, workhouse boy?
The nurse said she died of a broken heart.
I heard she died in the workhouse because she was no good at anything.
What did you say?
I heard that if she hadn't died, they would have punished her. Help. He's killing me.
Oh no!
Help me lock him in here.
You poor boy. We must get Mr. Bumble at once.
When Mr. Bumble heard what had happened, he hurried to Mr. Sourberry's house and knocked on the door to the cellar.
Oliver, do you know who's speaking?
Yes.
Aren't you afraid, Oliver?
No.
I understand the problem. You've given him too much meat, Mrs. Sourberry. You've been too kind to him. Leave him in this cellar without food for a few days, then feed him only soup.
That night, in the cold cellar, Oliver tried to carry himself to sleep yet again. But he felt too angry to sleep. When the house was quiet, he went to the door and realized it was not locked. He waited until it was just light and quietly opened the door. No one was awake and it was easy to leave the house without anyone realizing. He knew he could not stay in that place any longer. His life was unbearable. It was time for him to run away.